I find the work of Edward Bernays so fascinating. I encourage everybody, all your listeners, to go to Amazon and buy his book, Propaganda. It was written over a century ago, very eye-opening book. Edward Bernays was the double nephew of Sigmund Freud by birth and by marriage. So he's learning from Uncle Freud how the mind works, how people think, how the brain operates. But he was also working for Woodrow Wilson in the Committee for Public Information, which was the propaganda arm of the federal government designed to induce Americans to support World War I. And his job literally was to find ways to manipulate people to encourage them to buy war bonds or support the war and so forth. Today, Bernays is called the father of public opinion and also the father of propaganda, because the two terms are basically the same. He's most known in the corporate world. For example, in the 1910s, I think, cigarette smoking was not fashionable for women. Cigarette companies wanted to double their total addressable market to add women in addition to men. Bernays says, here's what we're going to do at the big Macy's parade or whatever in New York, some massive parade. He hires these models to dress up as the Statue of Liberty, and they held cigarettes in the air as they walked down the city, and they called them torches of freedom. And it was right as you have this whole women's liberation movement. So it aligned the perception of women smoking as this sign of liberation, which many women were really into it. So anyways, that's Bernays. Here's this quote from the book. And this gets to you talking about your staff, making judgments about my work without reading it, or just how we all, our ideas, our opinions are so easily affected by these influences from others. He says that the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they're to live together as a smoothly functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. So that was written over a century ago, before we had these little like propaganda surveillance devices in all of our pockets that are just social media and everything, conditioning people to think a certain way. If that was true back then of those in power, that they could manipulate the habits and the opinions and the actions of people, what does it look like today? What will it look like with AI and deepfakes and everything else in the future? And if we want to understand truth, if we want to understand things as they really are, not as they are claimed to be, I think we have some serious introspection to do about our gullibility, the impressionability of your staff to make conclusions that I think are false about our work because they didn't know. The judgments that I make about what's happening to Israel and Hamas because I'm operating off of headlines that are heavily influenced by people who have a desire to shape the narrative of this conflict. How do we know what is true? How do we win in a mind war where everywhere around us the truth is under siege? That is a big question that I think we don't really confront as much as we should. We just go along with our daily whatever, not realizing, as Bernays said, how controlled we actually are.
You know, that reminds me of a quote from Neville Goddard. And I just love this quote. It's so powerful. There is a great difference between resisting evil and renouncing it. When you renounce evil, you take your attention away from it and give your attention to what you want. Now is the time to control your imagination and give your energy to what you want. And I think this relates to what we're talking about, because if you see a war, our attention, a war for us to feed them, whoever the them is, fear, then we perpetuate it. But if we see that every act, every word uttered or headline that we read, the hand of God is behind it, ultimately, because we all work for God, even the dark side works for God, even if they don't admit it, then you just relax and trust that everything is divinely guided and orchestrated and things are happening for our highest and best good, ultimately, even if it's just for our spiritual refinement, even though we have to go through what seems like hell in order to get there.
It reminded me of a quote I was just pulling up from Thomas. I think this is apocryphal. I'm told Jefferson didn't actually say this, but it's a famous quote. In matters of style, swim with the current. In matters of principle, stand like a rock.
Mm.
And just to your point about just going with flow, not resisting it, letting these things happen and move through you. And it's just interesting to me I'll give you this example. Because sometimes I think we do need to stand up in a sit down world where oftentimes people are passive. You've seen perhaps that photo of a bunch of Nazi or Germans doing the Nazi salute. And there's the one guy standing there with his arms folded and not doing it. And that circulates the internet. It's actually a fascinating story who that guy is. He was married to a Jewish woman who was being persecuted, and he was feeling very disgruntled about that fact. It's a fascinating story. But I think we all imagine that we would be like that guy. Oh, if I were in those circumstances, I would resist. When human history tells otherwise. You look at the Stanley Milgram experiment, the famous psychological experiment showing that over 2/3 of people will potentially kill somebody else simply because they are instructed to do so by a person of authority. Stanley Milgram, of course, created this experiment after he watched the Nazis on trial at Nuremberg and afterwards, citing as their defense, I was just following orders. I was just doing what somebody else told me to. And so he was curious, to what degree are people willing to go to commit atrocities simply because they were given orders to do so? It was this whole electroshock experiment where the electricity would progressively get harder and individuals were instructed by someone in a lab coat. That was their authority figure, just a guy in a lab coat with a clipboard. And they were told to progressively administer more shocks. The person in the other room is screaming bloody murder by the end. Let me out of here. Let me out of here. And the guy in the lab coat, no, please continue. Very important that we continue this experiment. 2/3 of people went all the way to the end and administered the potentially fatal dose. And so I don't think most of us would be like the guy folding our arms. I think most of us are the people who go along with what everybody else is doing. Most of us will do what we're told and go along with things. And so for me, it's a question of what can I do now to stand up when the time is right? We had an event happen just a few months ago with this 12-year-old boy, Jaiden, in Colorado. His story went mega viral. I think it's got 50 million views across social media now. He was kicked out of school for having a Gadsden flag patch on his backpack in a Colorado Springs, Colorado school. For those who don't know, the Gadsden flag, it's that yellow, don't tread on me. It was an anti-British flag. The rattlesnake symbolized the 13 colonies joining together. And so Jaiden, this kid, very patriotic kid, and he had this patch on his backpack. The teacher claimed that flag has origins in slavery and therefore was a disruption to the classroom environment. Jaiden decided to stand up for himself. He said, nope, that's nonsense. I know my history. That's not true at all. It has no origins in slavery, had nothing to do with slavery. It was just a revolutionary era anti-British flag. He got mom involved. Mom, to her credit, secretly recorded the conversation with the vice principal as she's saying all this ridiculous stuff.